And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo. And it's great to be with you today. And, it's a fantastic program in store for us because we're going to be talking about proofs for the existence of God. But you know what? Are all the proofs equal? Are they all the same? Well, actually, there are some arguments that are better and some that are worse. And some are more persuasive than others, and some get you a little further knowledge about not only that God exists, but also divine attributes. Others, maybe not so. So to help sort all that out and kind of sort out the better from the worse, we're going to have Master Apologist Pat Flynn come on the show on the other side of the break. We're going to talk about better or worse arguments for the existence of God. And as you know, Pat was an atheist and a very studied atheist who realized that ultimately atheism kind of ends up in nihilism, and unwilling to accept that as a conclusion, he began to recheck his math, and he discovered Aristotle and St. Thomas, and eventually became a believer in God and also entered into the Catholic Church. So Pat Flynn is definitely qualified to walk us through and sort out, which arguments are better, which arguments are worse. And so that's going to be a lot of fun. It's always great to have Pat on the show. And by the way, speaking of Pat, he's also been partnering up with our friend Eric Robinson at Polycrates Paradigm, which we interviewed Eric a couple days ago. And for those apologetics junkies that love the issue of the canon of Scripture, especially the Old Testament canon, I'm going to be going on as a guest for Polycrates Paradigm this evening at 7. I'm not sure if it's going to be live or recorded, though, so I'll let you know, probably on Facebook or something, let you know whether it's going to be live. But anyway, we're going to be talking about why Catholic Bibles are bigger, my book on the Deuterocanon. I also have other books as well. And that's going to be a lot of fun because I believe it's going to be Eric and Pat are going to be interviewing me on what I believe is probably one of the most important topics to discuss with Protestants. And it's also one of those topics that there simply is no cogent answer why Protestantism doesn't include the 7 Old Testament books that Catholics call deuterocanonical, Orthodox might call it deuterocanonical, but Protestants call apocrypha. So we're going to talk about that. So anyway, before I talk about the rest of the program, let me give my shout-outs to all of you watching live stream on Facebook and YouTube. Greetings from the dojo, everybody. Welcome aboard. Great to see familiar names. Thank you for the emoji explosion. I appreciate that. No, Michelle, I'm not 8 foot. But I'm considerably shorter than that. So actually I feel good saying that I'm shorter. I also want to welcome all of you listening on radio around the country on great radio stations, and also all of you listening around the world via podcast. It's amazing the reach this program has, and I want to thank all of you for listening to the program, for especially subscribing, telling your friends about it. It's a great way to evangelize. It's a great way to help your fellow Catholics learn how to explain, defend the faith. And, it's you don't have to leave the comfort of your own home to do it. All you have to do is click. And so please do. We have a channel on YouTube, a Hands-On Apologetics channel. Please subscribe if you may, or tell your friends, do all those social media type thingies that you do. Let us kind of reach more and more people because got great stuff like Pat Flynn. Anyway, we're going to do our Finding the Fallacy for today. Finding the Fallacy, since it's Friday, we are going to do the propaganda technique. Today's propaganda technique is the appeal to plain folk technique. And also we meet an early church father. Today's early church father is St. Polycrates of Ephesus. Not exactly a household name, but nevertheless, he is part of those great extra-biblical early church writings that are so important for apologetics and just our understanding the early church and the New Testament as well. So without further ado, why don't we jump into defining the fallacy, which I said was a propaganda technique. The appeal to plain folks, this, ladies and gentlemen, is always on advertising. They always use this propaganda technique. It's also used in politics. It's maybe used a little bit, just a tiny little bit, maybe in debates, religious debates even. And it's the appeal to plain folk. And what is the appeal to plain folks? Well, it's the use of ordinary people to promote a product or service. The goal is to show that the product or service is of appeal and value to everybody. And plain folk appeal is in contrast to using like high-end celebrities, that type of thing, appealing to the rich and affluent. So that explains, like when you're watching a television commercial, why they select the people they do, the actors they do. They try to make them make them look like and talk like their target market, because they want. Because there's an appeal for us to, if our neighbors like something, then chances are we probably will give it a try. And so it kind of plays into that. It also, in politics, appeal to plain folk is, you ever see those political commercials where they have the candidates dress up in, blue jeans or whatever, and they're in some sort of drugstore out in the middle of nowhere, talking to people with overalls and, just rank and file. The whole idea, that whole picture is to make the candidate appear as if they're just like your neighbors. They're no different. So you can trust them just like you would the fellow down the street. And, whenever I discuss this particular propaganda technique, I always find that hilarious. Because if you think about it, we're electing the leader of the free world, especially, with presidential campaigns. And when they use this appeal to plain folk, it just seems so contradictory, because I don't know about you, but I want the leader of the free world not to be like a rank and file slob down the street. I want them to be exceptional. I want them to be, successful. I want them to be capable of leadership. I don't want them to look like me. I want them to look better than me. I want them to be better than me, because the job is so important. So in a way, I always crack up when I see that being used, because it's like, who wants this guy or this gal, to be the leader of the free world when they're, they appear no different than your next door neighbor, because hopefully you'd want a leadership to be better, right? Well, anyway, enough of me. That is the propaganda technique of the appeal to plain folks, our finding the fallacy for today. Why don't we jump to our Meet the Early Church Father, St. Polycrates of Ephesus. He was born sometime around AD 125, died around AD 196. So actually he's a very early church father. And like many of them, we don't know hardly anything about him. According to Jurgens, for the extremely meager biographical details of which we have of St. Polycrates, Bishop of Ephesus, we are indebted to his letter to Pope St. Victor. Polycrates was 65 years of age when he wrote the letter in around AD 190. Hence, he was born around 125. And among his kinsmen, there were 7 other bishops, and we know that he died in the year 196. And so we know him through this letter to Pope St. Victor I, which is preserved, as many of these fathers that we really don't know a lot about, through Eusebius' church history. And this letter that he wrote is a letter to Pope St. Victor. It's one of our primary sources for a controversy that broke out very early on in the church called the Quadrigesimian controversy. Namely, it's a controversy over when Easter should be celebrated. So I thought this was a really great early father coming up on Holy Week. Polycrates was the leader of a bishop of Asia Minor who opposed Pope St. Victor's order in regards to arranging the date of Easter so it always falls on a Sunday. Polycrates held a synod with his fellow bishops and informed Victor by letter of the reasons which they determined to continue to follow the only custom they knew, which was to observing the 14th Nicene, no matter what day of the week. So it's really a controversy over Easter Sunday, right? Let's see. Only a sizable fragment of the letter is extant by Eusebius. And in Eusebius' account, he says that Victor excommunicated the diocese of Asia and all the Quatramendesians as those who observed the 14th Nicene were called. Eusebius' information, however, is regarded with considerable suspicion, and is generally supposed that Irenaeus of Lyon, another very important early church father, and others heard of this intention of the Pope basically to excommunicate all these Eastern churches over when Easter should be celebrated. And they pleaded with him for tolerance, to which Pope St. Victor stayed his hand. He did not excommunicate them, even though Eusebius seems to intimate that he did. So we could probably read a little bit. Here's the introduction Eusebius gives. He says, "But of the bishops of Asia who confidently affirmed that they must hold to the old custom handed down to them, Polycrates was the leader, and he himself, in writing which he addressed to Victor to the Roman Church, said as follows the words of tradition that came down to him, which they linked to the Apostle John." So that is our early church father today, Polycrates of Ephesus. And coming up on the other side of the break, we're going to be talking with Pat Flynn about better and worse arguments for the existence of God. Stay tuned, folks.
Jesus said in Matthew 26, "Stay awake and pray that you may not enter into temptation." According to St. Ephrem, Jesus, who feared nothing, experienced fear and asked to be freed from death, although he knew it was impossible. How much more must we persevere in prayer before temptation assails us, so that we may be freed when the test has come? May God grant that we may withstand temptation and carry out His will in all things.
Did you know my mom's gonna have a baby? She is? Will it be a boy? Or will it be a girl? We don't know yet, but we heard the heartbeat and my dad said this is gonna be someone very special. You mean like being a president? Or maybe a doctor? Well, probably maybe like a singer or dancer, I think.
Hello, my name is Marianne Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. We know that every baby is a miracle and has the potential to do great things. If you know someone who is pregnant or in need of alternatives or assistance, or would like to support the work of Pro-Life Across America, please call 1-800-366-7773 or visit our website at prolifeacrossamerica.org. Pro-Life Across America is non-political and totally educational.
Pro-Life Across America, the Billboard people.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for your support here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Here's an easy way to do it. If you're going to sell or buy a house, call Real Estate for Life, 877-543-3871, because they're going to get you a Christ-centered agent to purchase your home or to sell your home. And at the close of escrow, a portion of his commission goes right back to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Call 877-543-3871. Thank you so much for your support.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back to Hands-on Apologetics. And we're going to look at the arguments for the existence of God. Are some better, some worse? Are they all equal? Some of them are, would you say, specialty arguments? To help sort out all this, we have Master Apologist Pat Flynn, a good friend of the show. Pat Flynn, of course, is the host of the Pat Flynn Show, which covers everything from fitness to mental health to business and writing, philosophy, and theology. He's the best-selling author, philosopher, fitness coach, musician, and entrepreneur, and who expounds on his theory of generalism, a theory applicable to each and every one of us. You can check out all the great stuff that Pat's doing at his flagship website, which is chroniclesofstrength.com. And Pat, welcome to Hands On Apologetics.
Gary, I've been waiting all week. It is always a pleasure to be with you. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, same here. I've been on pins and needles as well because, when it comes to proofs for the existence of God, you are the man because you have worked through these things, meticulously, from the depths of atheism, ultimately all the way back to Aristotle and Aquinas and into the Catholic Church.
Yeah, that's right. Just to give a little summary background of how I wound up where I am today, which is on your show, which I'm very happy to be here. I was baptized Catholic, so I was brought up very nominally in the faith. Kind of Christmas and Easter type of family for a while, and then that even began to fade away. And I had some initial seeds of doubt kind of planted in me in early middle school when I, like many people, saw a superficial conflict between what the Bible taught in terms of creation and what modern scientific cosmology taught. And rather than trying to seek out some type of reconciliation for that, I really just kind of headed in the skeptical direction. And I picked up many different skeptical writers throughout the years. I remember Mark Twain was a big influence on me. He kind of passed me off to other writers like H.L. Mencken, who then passed me off to more of the atheistic and existentialist philosophers like Nietzsche. And so it was like anything else in life, it's a gradual process. But I eventually came into a very kind of skeptical, naturalistic worldview. And then that worldview collapsed. I just realized as I continued to kind of plumb the depths of that this isn't going to work. There's no way that this can work. And you mentioned before, it kind of threw me into a pit of nihilism. And I would say not just nihilism, but also absurdity. Like, there's no way this could possibly be true, at least not in this form. So that opened me up to reconsidering, the theistic tradition. And I decided, well, let's go back to some of the best thinkers that I had a mild exposure to before, but never really studied in any depth. People like Plato and Aristotle, those are like that. They're like the dudes, right? They're just those, like, you got to start with Plato and Aristotle. And I began to appreciate their philosophy. Obviously, Plato and Aristotle had differences, but like they're kind of under the same big tent in terms of worldview, right? They're both realists. One is, more of an extreme realist. The other's more of a moderate realist. But those, compared to like modern philosophy and where modern philosophy is, those differences are really nowhere near as significant, right? So they're all kind of under the same general type of big tent worldview, I would say. And then kind of working up through Augustine, Boethius, Aquinas, I became gradually persuaded that this is essentially correct, particularly the Thomistic account. Like this is it, and the Thomistic tradition too. It obviously didn't stop with St. Thomas. So I often say, which is true, I was something of a Thomist even before I was a Catholic. But that opened me up to investigating the claims of Christianity and Catholicism, and eventually through a very windy path, I did return to the faith that I was originally baptized in. Mm-hmm.
There you go. Thanks be to God. That's what I love about your experience. It's one thing for a philosopher in Ivy League, Ivy Tower, to come up with arguments that they believe are, legitimate and cogent. But it's quite another for someone who actually has to kind of climb, step by step through arguments to really evaluate whether they're persuasive or not, or powerful or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is true. And I've been thinking about this a lot. And we've talked before about the two sides of the apologetic project. There's the matter and there's the manner. And the matter is doing your homework. It's understanding the arguments. What evidence do we have for the truth of the Catholic faith or the existence of God? And there you really do have to kind of roll up your sleeves and do some work. But then there's also the manner. And the manner is the more of the relational aspect of how do I best present what I think are good reasons for the existence of God or the Catholic faith in conversation. And these are I have learned many times through hard experience that these are two radically different skills. Somebody can be very well trained in the matter. You might have the metaphysical deductive arguments down ironclad, but they might be so abstract that they just go way over the heads of people in everyday conversation. So this might sound a little bit odd, but I sometimes think there's prudence in maybe foregoing what you think are maybe the best arguments for God for something that might be overall a little bit weaker. It might not get you to a full classical theism, but it might connect more. And that's something you have to kind of make. You have to be prudent. You have to have the wisdom to make that decision in a certain context. But what I've been thinking about, Gary, before I was coming on the show, is a kind of 4-step framework that I found very helpful in facilitating a productive apologetic conversation. I know you're kind of a big picture guy. You like to know where we're going before we get into it. And I think it blends some elements of arguments that I think are very strong for God, and other I wouldn't even maybe call them arguments so much as clues or hints that tend to be very appealing and connect. It's funny you talked about the plain folk before, that in some ways connect with the plain folk, right? Not the people who are just sitting in the ivory tower of academia. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to present in our conversation today. But you're right that we have to have a wide range of different tools for conversation. And it's one thing to study the arguments for your own personal satisfaction or journey, which I did. But there's a saying in business that you're often not your customer, right? That your problems aren't necessarily your customer's problems. And if we're trying to go out there and present a case and be apologists, we have to understand that not everybody's going to be coming from the same position that we are. So while I may really love Aquinas's participation metaphysics and his distinctions between essence and existence, honestly, how many people in everyday conversation am I going to present that argument to? Probably very few, right?
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially in the area of theistic apologetics, it does really get abstract. But I was thinking, your distinction between matter and manner, I think, explains a lot, because it explains why, in social media, YouTube land, you will have people who are have incredibly large followings that really aren't very sophisticated. There's dozens of angry atheists, that put up videos. Their arguments are very soft, but it's like people still feel they're persuasive. Where,
right.
Watching something from a strict Thomist, presentation would be rock solid, but it just doesn't have that same gravity.
And I think there's a reason for that. And that goes to the kind of the first of the 4 points that I wanted to make. And that the first argument we have to make is not an argument at all. The first thing we have to do is to get people to recognize that Christianity is good and that it's desirable. And this was something that Pascal understood very well, that I think has been lost in the modern context. And you see this, especially, in fact, I was going to bring this up the other day. I was just going on YouTube and seeing, well, what are the old skeptics up to these days, right? It's fun to revisit your old haunts every once in a while. And so many of the videos that I saw weren't really addressing any of the classic arguments for God's existence or providing any robust argument for atheism. Rather, they're trying to make Christianity into seeming like it's something that it's bad, something that we shouldn't want, something that is immoral. One guy was saying that God's essentially just a slave owner, right? Which is a fundamental misunderstanding of Christianity and classical theism. Like no serious Christian should believe that, right? But it's this, and whether it's intentional or just misunderstanding, I'm not sure. But it isn't so much an argument for atheism. It's trying to make an emotional appeal to our moral intuitions that this is something that we shouldn't even want to pursue, because it's so disgusting or wrong. And I think that's something that people miss. And I think our first project before launching into arguments is just to get some clarity about, well, what is Christianity? And why should we desire it in the first place to be true? Why should we want it to be true? And there's nothing wrong with wanting it to be true.
Yeah, that's excellent point. It doesn't seem rational to say, well, God can exist because if he did, he'd be like a slave owner. So therefore he doesn't exist. It's almost like if you try to follow that logic, It doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
It's a complete non sequitur. I mean, like God could exist and still be a slave owner. Like that's perfectly within the realm of possibility. So it goes to show that now we don't think that that's true, but it goes to show that it's not a proper argument for an atheistic worldview. What this skeptic was trying to do was trying to make us see Christianity in a very negative light. So that way we're going to be sort of morally repelled by it and not even want to pursue it. And that's something that needs to be addressed. We need to make sure that Christianity is seen in the proper light, which is inherently attractive. So that way people can become receptive to the arguments after that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, well, of course, the four atheists, the new atheism, especially Hitchens, that was their bread and butter, was to lampoon Christianity and make it repulsive. But it's, but in terms of argument, it was certainly wanting.
But it goes to show the rhetorical effectiveness of that approach, because they had still do have so much appeal. Whereas you have other atheists that are far more sophisticated, far more intellectual, and they're actually trying to advance arguments. I don't think any of them ultimately succeed. But almost nobody knows who those atheists are. Right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So there's this incredible asymmetry between the dumb atheists and the smart atheists. And all the popular ones are pretty much all the dumb ones. And all the intelligent atheists, very few people know who they are. But there are very intelligent atheists. I don't deny that. I think I spent most of my time studying those guys. And they at least make you think. They at least make you try and address some objections. And I think you're all the better when you do that. But the real thing we have to deal with are the Hitchens types, and he's kind of the paradigm example. He's the one that almost every YouTube skeptic tries to imitate in some form or another. Just a lot of Hitchens puppets out there. But I think we just have to, again, like get clear, like, well, what is Christianity? And show that it not only is desirable, but we should want it to be true, because that's gonna make fertile ground for productive apologetic conversation. So just giving like a general sketch of the gospel, I think, is really helpful, or even God's existence, and thinking even from our own desires, right? So Christianity holds that God is the source from which all finite contingent things come, and to which everything returns ultimately. And even within our own hearts, when we think about our desires, it's not like we just have a finite set of desires. It's not like we just want some friendship. We want perfect friendship. It's not like we just want some justice. We want perfect justice. It's not like we want some love, but perfect love. And what Christianity is saying is those desires are not meant for frustration. There is something qualitatively infinite that can satisfy those desires. And I guess we can pick it up there after the break.
Absolutely. Great. We're chatting with Pat Flynn about better or worse arguments for the existence of God. Stay tuned. Or to come on the other side of the break.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And here's an easy way to support us by going to smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center or Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And when you log in your Amazon account and you purchase products, a portion of it will go right back in supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And it doesn't cost you a dime. I want to thank you ahead of time, because that supports us year-round. May God bless you and your family.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Rumi, and I play Jesus Christ in The Last Days, The Passion and Death of Jesus the Christ. This Lent, I'd love to invite you to join me and my co-director Maria Vargo for a very special live stream broadcast of this production. Beginning Palm Sunday, April 5th, and Holy Thursday, April 9th at noon Pacific and 3 p.m. Eastern Time, you'll be able to watch the full program free on our Facebook page or on our website. To watch us on Facebook, go to facebook.com/The Last Days of Jesus Passion Play, or on our website at www.thelastdayspassionplay.com. While Christians around the world are unable to go to church during Holy Week, we are grateful to be able to bring this beautiful and reverent depiction of Christ's love and sacrifice for all into your homes. I pray you join us, and have a blessed Easter.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Pat Flynn, and before the break, if you're just joining us, Pat was he's given us 4 tips on kind of sorting out the better and the worst types of arguments for the existence of God. We were talking about how many atheists try to poison the idea of the existence of God and make it less attractive so people won't dive into arguments. And he was saying that we should do the opposite. We should show that there's something very attractive and beautiful about God's existence. And Pat, when you were saying that, I kept thinking in my mind, those transcendental desires, that definitely hits the target. So right before the break, you were just touching on those.
Right. So think of all the desires that we have for, not like I would say, friendship, beauty, truth, love, justice, and home, those big 6 ones. And it's not like we just want a little bit of any of these things. We want all of them, all the way to the maximum infinite amount. Well, now we kind of hit an interesting snag, right? Because everything in the physical world is finite. It's definitely not the type of thing that can satisfy those infinite longings of the human soul, which we all have. And just a moment's introspection will reveal that this is a deep truth. It's our soul's upward yearning. We all recognize this. And every time we hit a limit in life on any one of these things, we rebound from that limit, and we eventually want more. We become dissatisfied with it. So if naturalism is true, which is kind of the strongest form of atheism, we have to kind of concede that all those desires are just ultimately set for frustration, right? It also becomes curious of, well, how did we ever even get the notion of a perfect justice? Like we've never experienced that in society. Like, where does that come from? Or the universe, or perfect love? Where is that? So there's hints or clues in there as well. But Christianity says no. Actually, God wants you for perfect, complete happiness. And he is there to fulfill those desires. He is the infinite wellspring that can satisfy your infinite desires. And we are meant for an eternal beatific friendship with him, this perfect beatific activity to have all of our perfect desires fulfilled. And that's a good thing. That's a beautiful thing, and that's a wonderful thing. Now, it does require a certain initiation of love on our part, and that God did not make us determined puppets. He did not make us slaves. He did make us free. And that is an important part of the Christian story. And that makes sense, right? I think in order to have love, we have to have some ability to either initiate love or not initiate love. It's hard to see how love can come from just some type of determined agent. You're just programmed to act a certain way. I don't think anyone would accept that as a traditional view of love. And there, of course, there's a lot more to the story than that, but I think just letting people know that Christianity says, no, all those desires that you have, those aren't set for frustration. Those are set for fulfillment. And God has definitively broken into human history to make that fulfillment possible. And he has shown us the way to get to that ultimate fulfillment in our lives. And as long as you desire those things, which all of us do, then you should at least pay attention to Christianity, because there's something there that speaks to this deep yearning within all of our souls.
Yeah, I think that is such a powerful apologetic. In fact, it's almost impossible to deny it. If you say that everybody has a desire for the most complete, perfect knowledge of the truth, answer to all the questions, and someone says, no, I don't think I do, or I think that's wrong, by denying it, you actually affirm it, because you're like, oh, so you think my explanation is not complete and there's a fuller more perfect explanation. It's like you can't get away from this.
Right, and it's also a certain litmus test, and it helps to engage the level of sincerity with who we're talking with, and some people might just be stubborn, quite frankly, and that's fine. At least we'll know that off the bat, and then we might have to address things a different way. But I find that this approach is good for the person who might be skeptical, but at least open-minded enough that if we can start to shift the view into what Christianity properly is, that there's this perfect God who perfectly loves us into existence and eventually into eternity, that, how could you not see that as beautifully attractive? Now, of course, there's certain objections that we have to deal with along the way. Evil and hell are the two big ones, but those can be successfully dealt with, and it can be shown, I think, especially within the Catholic tradition, that evil and hell are not opposed to love. In fact, there's actually the sort of thing that we might expect from a God of love. But we can hang a lantern on that and maybe save that for the end of the conversation. But I think that's the first step. Before we launch into arguments, we have to get Christianity seen in the right light as the inherently beautiful and attractive thing that it is. Yeah. The next thing that I would encourage people to do, so I'll outline the kind of three other steps here, and then we can dive into the details, is serve up a Pascal's wager before you get into the arguments, at least a contemporary form of it, because that's going to help lower the barrier to entry for somebody to seek religion and to seek relationship with God. Oftentimes, I think, and this is something that skeptics love to do. I used to do this myself, is they have a kind of like baseline level of skepticism in their daily lives. It's honestly not usually that high, but then when it comes to anything regarding God's existence, they just crank that dial up as high as they possibly can, right? Just almost arbitrarily. Now, they almost never apply that same level of skepticism to their philosophical skepticism, because most of the time, if they did, it would collapse their own skeptical worldview. So it's very arbitrary. It's very targeted specifically on God. What Pascal's wager can do, not just for the skeptic, but for the everyday person, is show that it's reasonable and responsible and rational to initiate a life of religious seeking. You don't have to fake belief. Nobody wants you to fake believe, but to at least seek God if you think that there's at least some degree of plausibility to Christianity specifically. What is that degree exactly? Is it 50%? Who knows, right? But we could say 50% for the sake of argument, because there is potentially infinite amount to gain: eternal happiness, friendship with God, and the beatific vision and the community of saints, and comparatively little to lose by living a life of religious seeking. And there's lots of really good research, sociological research, that shows that people who live a religious life actually tend to report levels of higher well-being than people who don't anyways. So the downside is almost like nothing. Maybe giving up some time on the weekends, maybe a little bit extra of your income for charity. But it looks like all that stuff makes you kind of happier as a person anyway. So it's hard to even say that there's much of a downside there. So so when you just excuse me here. Sorry, Gary.
Oh, it's okay.
I don't think it's Corona, but I do have something. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it is that time of year too. But what you're saying fits in really nice with this whole phenomenon of the spiritual but not religious type people who are seeking, some sort of spirituality but not necessarily rigid structure. That kind of points to that as well.
Yeah, it does. I think it works for Pascal's wager works for a lot of people because Christianity has such clear stakes, and it's so it's so forward, right? And given what you have to gain versus what you would have to give up, again, if you think there's some degree of plausibility that Christianity may be true, what the wager is saying, it becomes rational to at least seek that out, to become receptive to it. And what does that look like? Well, maybe it means just joining an RCIA or attending Mass or praying conditional prayers. God, if there is a God, save my soul if I have a soul. God, if you're there, like, please help me to find you if you exist. And that's one of the promises of Christ, right? Seek and you will find. So in some sense, Christianity is testable. Like, it really is. Yeah. So test it, right? It becomes rational at least to test it. Versus what when you consider what you have to gain versus what you have to lose, and then but here's the important thing about Pascal's wager is it's not itself an argument that Christianity is true. It's something that you serve the arguments on top of. So it doesn't relieve you of the duty of having to look at the evidence and having to look at the arguments, because you still have to get either yourself to a certain position or somebody else to whatever that degree is of thinking Christianity, and specifically Christianity, is true. And that might involve arguments for God or arguments for the resurrection. So that comes back to the matter, making sure you have those arguments. But it is important to admit that Pascal's wager doesn't settle the issue. It's something that you should keep in the sort of the backdrop of the conversation, or present as you're going into the conversation.
Yeah, very good. I think that's one of those areas where Pascal's wager is misrepresented. Sometimes opponents to theism would say, try to make it into an actual argument for God's existence, and then tear down the straw man.
Yeah, and Pascal was a betting man, and so he's just not coming from that position. And somebody might say, well, what about the other world religions? I would say, what about them? You have to evaluate the evidence. And then if you think that Christianity seems like the most plausibly true or the only plausibly true one, that's when the wager really starts to kick in. So the objection from many religions just kind of misses the point. And of course, I would argue that when you evaluate the world religions, Christianity will by far come out as the most plausible. So yeah, both of those are two common objections you hear, that, okay, that doesn't prove God. Well, it's not supposed to. And two, what about other religions? Well, what's the point? We haven't gotten to the arguments yet. Yeah, very good. So, okay. So first, make theism attractive. Number two, show that seeking God is a rational choice. And you do that with Pascal's wager. So those are two very important fundamental steps. And they're not necessarily, proofs or demonstrations, are they? It's more of persuasions, leading to bring people to the proofs. It's all stage setting. That's what we're doing, and I think that often gets missed in conversations, especially online conversations where people just want to kind of club each other over the head with arguments. Arguments are good. I love arguments, but we have to consider the context in which those arguments are being presented. And sometimes we have to be willing to play the long game and just spend some time with people and really develop friendships. That's another aspect of it. Who's most likely to listen to your arguments? Well, people who probably like you and to some degree trust you. They'll probably be the most receptive, and that might mean waiting on some of the arguments and taking a genuine. It can't be affected. People can sniff out when somebody's just trying to, be fake. But taking and you should, as Christians, we should take genuine, interested friendships in people that we encounter in everyday life. That's just part of what it means to be a Christian. So, okay, yeah, that's probably a decent little pause, and then we'll get into the final 2 points from there. Excellent.
All right, yeah, we're chatting with Pat Flynn about better or worse arguments for the existence of God. Really fascinating discussion, and there's going to be a lot more to come on the other side of the break. Listen to Hands on Apologetics. I'm Gary Machuda. We will be right back.
Hebrews 11:3 says, "By faith we come to understand." According to St. Augustine, understanding is the reward of faith. Therefore, seek not to understand that you may believe, but believe that you may understand. May God grant us a strong living faith in Him and His divine plan of salvation, and help us to believe so that we may understand.
Attention VMPR listeners. We've talked at length about the attack on our youth through popular culture media, but what if I told you there was someone trying to make a difference? The newest novel, Britfield and the Lost Crown, by C.R. Stewart, is reaching schools across America and sharing Christian morals alongside great storytelling. What if I told you that this mission needs your help? To reach more children, Britfield and the Lost Crown need funding for their ongoing book tour. If you're interested in making a difference, if you're interested in buying the book, or are curious and want more information, go to BritfieldInstitute.org. That's BRITFIELD Institute.org. Or email media@britfield.com. Help open up the world of Britfield and the Lost Crown to people everywhere.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Pat Flynn about better or worse arguments for the existence of God. And Pat's given some really great tips. First, is to argue for God's existence, Christianity as being attractive. And, Pat, I think if we were able to get across the message, like Aquinas says, that the ultimate goal of the faith is happiness, I don't think that's on the top of most people's list. If you ask a Catholic, what's the goal of being a Catholic? They'd have a whole bunch of other things, but it's really ultimately happiness with God. And then also arguing for plausibility, that it's plausible, it's rational to search out this God. So let's jump to step 3, shall we?
Right. So now we're going to get into some of the arguments here. And step 3 and 4 are blends of arguments. So step 3 is, I think, trying to get somebody to see that there has to be a necessary foundation to reality. And we can talk about what that is. And this is going to borrow from some of the arguments that I really do think are the best arguments, the most robust arguments, the sort of deductive metaphysical demonstrations, which we've covered in some depth on your show before. So I won't repeat the details now, but I know we've done the Thomistic arguments, we've done contingency, we've done we even did the moral argument, which is a different class of argument, and we'll get to that. But just to kind of give people an idea of what's out there, so you have these various arguments that are often used to establish classical theism. Right, a God that is absolutely simple, necessary, eternal, immutable, omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent. Like, you get the full, robust picture of God. And I think these are the best arguments. I think they're the most robust. I think they're the hardest to escape. But they also are the most technical, the most abstract. And so they might not always be the most conducive to everyday conversation. But they are the arguments that ultimately converted me, right? These were the arguments that got me to where I am now. Then there's other arguments that, have a good amount of rigor when you really dive into them. Something like the Kalam argument, for example, which is very well known and became repopularized by a philosopher named Dr. William Lane Craig. And that argument can get you to God, but it doesn't get you to a God of a classical theism. And the Kalam argument, for people who've never heard it before, is just two simple premises. Everything that begins to exist has a cause, which is a metaphysical principle, and that the universe began to exist. And you can argue for that philosophically and on the basis of scientific evidence. And then it kind of follows from there, just logically, that the universe itself has a cause. And you can kind of unpack a very general kind of monotheism, but it's lacking in content in terms of a full classical theism. So, for example, you can get to, okay, whatever this transcendent being is must be extremely powerful to create the universe. But is he omnipotent, for example? You would need additional arguments to get to omnipotence, whereas the sort of more robust metaphysical arguments that I like Aquinas's, some of Aquinas's arguments, just through those arguments you can sort of unpack all the divine attributes, if you will. But there's trade-offs there. The trade-off is the Kalam argument can be really simply presented, right? Like, it's very simple. And if it goes through, it moves us along the way considerably. And well, why not just add other arguments on top? Like, why do we have to solve everything with one argument? Is the other kind of sometimes people think you got to make the entire case for Christianity full stop with one argument. Well, no, it's a gradual case. It's a cumulative case. So again, it's important to have multiple tools at our disposal. And then, so what I like to do, Gary, is kind of step 3 is get people to see that there has to be some type of necessary foundation to reality. And then the 4th step is to make a cumulative argument or an inference to the best explanation. To kind of like take a step back from the abstract metaphysics and just say, what, in terms of like the foundation of reality, would it make more sense if this foundation were God, or at least something very much like God, possessed of mind, for example? Or would it make more sense if this thing were purely physical? There's no mind, there's no consciousness, there's no intelligence. And then just kind of like look at the broad scope of human experience, data we have, and then make an inference to the best explanation. So I guess what I'm saying is it's okay, and what I say in Ghostbusters, to cross streams, to kind of take what you think is useful from some of the best and better arguments, but then switch to perhaps arguments that by themselves may not be as robust, may not be as cinching, but in a cumulative way are much more easier to present, and especially seen in light of Pascal's wager, make it absolutely obvious and reasonable and responsible to become a religious seeker after that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because that latter category of the more cumulative arguments that aren't as precise or technical, they're a little bit easier to grasp for the ordinary person than the abstract, like hard, I guess you would say, hard arguments for the existence of God.
Right.
So why in that order? Why would you necessarily go with the demonstrations first and then to the cumulatives, or would it be better to do the cumulatives first and then go to the demonstrations?
I think it's going to depend on the person ultimately and how you're feeling out the conversation. But I do like to get them to get people to see that there has to be some necessarily existing foundation to explain why anything else exists at all. And I think you can do this pretty simply, and I think we can be positive and certain of this. Like, this seems very clear to me. And we just start with the paradox of existence, or the paradox of caused realities. So we look out into the world of experience, and we realize that at least some things are caused to exist, right? They exist only because conditions beyond themselves were fulfilled, which enabled those things to exist. I mean, just take us, for example, right? So there were the conditions of my parents meeting, but there's also the conditions of the strong nuclear force, electromagnetism. So there were certain conditions fulfilled beyond myself, which not only brought me into existence, but literally hold me in existence. So this is interesting, right? Because it seems like most everything that we encounter is that type of thing, that it's something that has an explanation beyond itself. It's a caused reality. Well, here's where the paradox kicks in, is, okay, it seems like most things are caused realities, but could everything, at least the collection of everything, or everything collectively, be a caused reality? And here I think we can be certain that the answer is no. Because if all of reality, and this will be the most abstract thinking we have to do on this episode, but just imagine that all of reality, everything that is or once was, whatever that is, were collectively a caused reality, what we would be saying is that all of reality would be dependent upon the fulfillment of conditions beyond itself in order to exist. But there's nothing beyond all of reality by definition. So if that were the case, reality would be awaiting the fulfillment of conditions beyond itself in order to exist, but those conditions in principle could never be fulfilled, and all of reality would be nothing. Nothing would exist. Literally nothing would exist. And that's just using disjunctive reasoning to get to that conclusion. So we can be very sure of that. So what do we have to conclude? Well, we have to conclude that contrary to the caricature of theistic arguments that we say that everything has a cause, it begins the opposite way. We say, no, not everything can have a cause. In principle, there must be at least something, and maybe only one thing. But we haven't even said that it couldn't be more than one thing yet. But there has to be at least something that exists in a radically different way, that is uncaused, that exists in virtue of what it is. It doesn't borrow existence from anything else, but has existence in a sort of built-in way. Otherwise, we're forced to the absurdity that nothing exists. But something does exist. So there has to be some kind of basement, some foundational layer to reality to explain why any type of caused reality exists. Or why, another way to think about it, of why reality in total is self-sufficient. It has no cause beyond itself, but almost everything that we encounter in reality is not self-sufficient. It does have a cause. And that alone, I found, often very much just gets people to God. They say, oh, yeah, but now we haven't established that. That's a funny thing. Like, we haven't established what that uncaused reality is. But I think when people realize that, there's kind of an intuitive jump that I would say is ultimately correct, even though we have to argue it out a little bit more. But I find that is actually a very helpful first step in a lot of conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because then it just becomes a question of, well, what is that ultimate, uncaused reality? And then you could kind of tease out the divine attributes, because it would have to have certain qualities.
Right. So if everything, ultimately derives its fulfillments, the fulfillment of conditions for its existence from this uncaused reality, which has to be the case, this thing at least has some power, right? So it has to be powerful in some sense in order to be able to produce any type of effect. And this is where you can take the more abstract metaphysical route and show that there can only, and this is what Aquinas does so brilliantly, there can only be in principle one of these things, and it must have all the divine attributes. But what I'm saying is we can actually take, I think, somewhat of a simpler route that is a little bit easier for people to grasp, and that's just asking what is the best explanation for the things that we experience. So what are some of the things that we experience? So there's a foundation to reality. We got that. Okay, now what might this foundation to reality be? Given that we experience certain things like consciousness, like the fine-tuning of the universe, the beginning of the physical universe, the applicability of mathematics, near-death experiences, religious experiences, mystical experiences, and so on. Just list the daily phenomena that we see. So let's just take one of them, right? So let's take the fine-tuning of the universe, where it seems like things have been dialed in such an incredibly precise manner to allow for the emergence of intelligent interactive life. Everything from entropy to the strong force to the mass of the electron. If these things were off by like a hair's breadth, not only would there not be life, and in many cases there wouldn't even be chemistry, or the universe would have just collapsed back in on itself. Now, what best explains this? Might it make sense that we could expect something like this if there's mind at the foundation that has the power to intend certain states of affairs, that has the power to aim, that has the power to arrange and interrelate different beings? Or does it make sense that if the foundation is completely mindless, is completely dumb, just a kind of brute physical fact? I think most people could easily recognize, no, it seems like intelligence is a better explanation for this. Or take consciousness, right? We're conscious beings. Most people don't deny that. You get some really weird fringe philosophers that will question that, but we'll leave them aside. We'll address them another time. Most people realize that no, the consciousness definitely exists. Okay, if the foundation of reality is purely physical, meaning it's devoid of consciousness, there's no intentionality, there's no directedness, there's no unity. Maybe if it's even just disparate, it's just a bunch of kind of physical simples. They're totally disparate. How on earth could we ever imagine through just pure time and chance that all that dumb physical stuff could somehow flip over into its perfect qualitative opposite? That something that's unconscious could become conscious, that something that's undirected could become directed, that something with no intentions could have intentions, that something that doesn't have any awareness becomes aware. And that seems to me an impossible qualitative category to traverse. Now, I know we're missing out on some of it, but that's the general approach that I think we can take. Mm-hmm.
No, that's a great introduction. And Pat, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's great. Where can people go to get a hold of your material?
chroniclesofstrength.com.
All right, Pat Flynn, thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
All right. And yes, it's a great program. Learned a lot, and talk about great programs. Coming up next, we have How You Impact Catholic Talk coming at you with the Terry and Jesse Show. And it's time to shut down the Midwest Command Center. Turn up the JoJo lights. Thank you so much for listening to the program. And God willing, we'll talk again Monday. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.